hope you had a Merry Christmas and you're back in the office. So thank you for jumping into the webinar today on, I know what is for many still a holiday week. But for those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Josh Gregory. I am the director of our consulting and training teams here. Before that, I was on the broker side. So I've worked on the deal side, and now I work with buyers, helping find the right deal, making educated purchases, but also I work with a lot of our contractors on their businesses as well. So for all of our regular attendees, welcome back. And again, whether you are brand new to the space or you've been coming to webinars, you've been a contractor for 30 years, we still want these to be a place where you can come in, learn, ask questions, have a little bit of fun. And so that's what these are here for. And if you've never done it, general flow of today is that I will go over some intro stuff. I will bring on our guest a little bit later to go through some content, and then I will jump into the Q&A at the end, where we will open it up to any questions you all have. And for those of you who are here, this is the last webinar of 2022. We won't see you again until next year. So thank you for coming today. And before we get started, I do have a quick disclaimer that I need to read, as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. So all that means is that you're not going to hear any materially non-public information today, but we are going to be here to help make sure that you are getting some education, some good knowledge as we head into the end of the year and start preparing for next year. Now, if you have been to one of our webinars before, you will know that our tradition here is that for us to answer one of your questions, you first have to answer one of ours. So the question of the day this week, I'm giving everybody a couple of options so you can decide how you want to answer this. But as we're heading towards New Year's, the question is, what are your plans for New Year's Eve? That's option one this year. Or do you have any kind of ongoing New Year's Eve tradition that you do every year? Or just what's the most memorable New Year's Eve you've ever had? I will accept any of those answers, but you do have to give me one of those answers. So when you're going to the Q&A and trying to type in your question to ask us, first off, put it in the Q&A box. If you put it in the chat, I'll miss it. So make sure you put it in the Q&A button at the bottom. But before you type in your question, first answer our question about New Year's, and then type in your question. I'll read your answer out loud. We'll answer your question. We'll get into it. Leland and I will also both answer your questions at the end as well, or both answer the question of the day at the end. Before we get to that, just a quick update on our new inventory this week. The first is a pickup and delivery listing out of Western Iowa. This is 5 routes at $475,000, and it does have a manager and spare trucks and spare drivers. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit smaller, but you can still kind of get your feet wet with about 5 routes, but it still has a manager, this is the one for you. It's also one that is currently doing a 6-day week instead of 7, so you don't have to operate on Sundays. The second listing, the last one for this week, is a line haul listing, and it's out in the Pacific Northwest, and it is 5 runs at $750,000. And these are 5 dedicated solo runs, and it has 2 spare tractors and 3 spare drivers. And so again, these are dedicated runs with more than enough tractors and drivers. So if you're looking for those runs out in the Northwest, those are the ones for you. So those are the only 2 new listings this week. But if you have any questions on either of them, again, reach out to the team either through the webinar or through the chat. You can type in and let us know your question, or you can just email us and ask questions. We'll make sure to get them answered for you. So my co-host today is going to be Leland Mize. Leland is the Chief Financial Officer for Spencer's Companies, and he's going to spend some time talking today about the difference between a financial assessment and an audit, and what you need to be staying on top of to prepare and protect yourself in the future financially. So Leland, I see that you've already kind of jumped on. So if you just want to give a quick background, and then we'll jump into it.
Yeah, sure. So my background spans 20 plus years at this point in accounting, which is hard for me to even say, but I've been with Spencer since April of 2017. I've been working as CFO for all of his different companies over that time period prior to being here in the Nashville area. I was in Central Mississippi I was for, I guess, 9 years at a behavioral and mental health facility, so in the healthcare space, and before that in public accounting. So pretty short, direct path to being here. I haven't jumped around a lot, but all of it's been in accounting and helping to either audit or financially manage different operations.
Perfect. All right. So let's get into it, Leland. So the first thing, as a contractor, you will receive multiple different kinds of communications and assessments that sometimes people refer to all of them as an audit. But what's the difference between, if you get an actual FedEx audit versus, a rapid ratings assessment? What's the difference between those two?
Yeah. So some pretty distinct differences. The rapid ratings audit is definitely the simpler of those two scenarios. The rapid ratings is where you have to answer a few questions, nothing major, just simply about ownership and just very basic information about the company, and provide a balance sheet, an income statement, and a cash flow statement to the rapid ratings, I guess, third-party provider. Essentially, FedEx contracts out with that organization to be able to assess on what is usually about a 12-month interval, the financial health of the FedEx contractor. And so if you've got multiple contracts, it's important to be able to identify what contracts you're actually reporting on. So just make sure, that kind of goes back to making sure that you have good books and records to be able to produce those types of reports. I mean, obviously, as a FedEx contractor, you're probably beholden to different third parties like banks, where they're going to be depending on you to be able to produce reliable financial records. And this is one of those examples. So in this case, being able to produce a balance sheet, an income statement, and cash flow statement will be the primary thing that they're asking for. And they'll usually ask for, in our experience, 2 years of information so that you're able to show them, whatever the most recent fiscal period is that you finished, 12-month fiscal period, and then the prior, if you've been a contractor for long enough to be able to produce 2 years. And then very often, if you're kind of in the middle of the year before you get the notification, they'll ask for some year-to-date financials. So it doesn't have to be a stressful or burdensome process. I think there's been some perception out there that this is an intrusion and there are some overreach there. But really, this is a process that you don't have to be afraid of, as long as you have the right structure in place to respond accordingly. So it's just kind of reinforces what we preach around here all the time, is to make sure that you have a good bookkeeper in place to help take that burden off of you, so that you get to be the end user of information. And when somebody like a rapid ratings or like a bank asks you for information, you're able to have the information in place and turn around, provide it to whoever needs to on a timely basis. When I say timely, in this case, rapid ratings is usually going to be looking for that within a 30-day period. And it's something that's electronically submitted and through a portal. So again, email notification, you click a link, you upload some documents, and it's not anything really overly burdensome in that case. So that's really kind of the rapid ratings side of that question. When it comes to the FedEx audit, that's where some of it just gets, quite frankly, outside of my purview, because I get involved when it comes to the financial operation side of that. But when it's the operational aspects of making sure that the FedEx contractor is complying with the contract and meeting the standards set forth in the contract, there's a lot of operational things and a lot of operational metrics that will have to be evaluated and provided at that time. And so that's going to be a little bit outside, but it's certainly, and make no mistake, a broader scope of things that they're looking at. It's going to be a more burdensome review, and certainly more so than just the rapid rating side of things. One of the common things that I've seen FedEx contractors struggle with is being able to produce good, reliable payroll records. That is a really important aspect of the FedEx contract to be able to prove what you're paying, who you're paying, treating them as W-2s, and making sure that you're meeting all federal regulations, because ultimately they are your employees. And so when I've seen complications with that other thing here, that other FedEx audit, that's generally where I've seen common problems. And so if I could encourage you to make sure that you've got the resources in place to have a good balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow statement available at least quarterly, but preferably monthly. I would, that's the main thing to be able to meet the rapid ratings burden when it comes to the operational, and as far as the risk that I've been privy to, it would be on the payroll side, and making sure that whoever you use, your bookkeeper or another third-party payroll provider, that they are producing reliable records, and that the why behind why you're paying someone and how is clearly documented, so that they can review that things are being done appropriately. Generally, if you're having good experience in your workers' comp audit, then you're probably going to have a good experience with your FedEx audit, at least as it pertains to your employees and that side of things, because workers' comp is going to be asking you a lot of the same questions. And so you can kind of treat that as a baseline when you go through that, and that is an annual thing. And so when you're going through that, if it's relatively painless and you have what they need, then you can feel fairly secure that you're going to have the resources in place to meet the needs on the FedEx side.
Yeah, and a quick plug there for, if you're worried about your payroll, like some of the best hours you can spend is to talk to a wage and hour attorney for your state, and try to make sure that you're not missing out on any kind of nuance that's related to your state in particular. So if you've never done that for your business, I would recommend doing that, just as a, an hour or two of time, just to make sure that you're not doing anything that is, either a contractual violation with FedEx or just some kind of state law that you're breaking. So from a timeline perspective, are these audits that you get every year? Is there when we're talking about the rapid ratings, do those happen regularly? Is there any kind of format to that?
Yeah. So it's usually going to be, every 12 to 18 months is what we've seen, just from our experience at this point. And often what you'll see is that they'll ask for that 12 months, and then they'll pick up that, if you're 18 months since your last reporting period, they'll go ahead and ask for those year-to-date financials to pick up the rest of that 18-month period. But it's not something where it's an indication that you're doing something wrong or that you're in trouble or any of that kind of stuff. It is them putting themselves in a position to be able to assess the health of the FedEx contracting base. And so another thing that I stress, like at the summits and not so much at the summits, but certainly at the expos when I've spoken, I think there's a temptation there for a FedEx contractor, for different reasons, to maybe try to present themselves as a little better than they really are, or a little worse than they really are, depending on what the benefits to one of those scenarios they perceive wanting to fall into. They might want to look better, so they're looking like one of the best contractors, and they think that's going to give them more room to negotiate. Or they may want to look worse, and gosh, I'm poor, I'm barely making it, and I need some help when it comes to that next negotiation. Certainly, those can be some lines of thought when it comes to it. But I highly encourage you to just show no better, no worse. Just show the way it is. And that's going to be the best path forward, because if they ask questions and all of a sudden you've got to justify why something is better or worse than what it really is, it's going to make the conversation a lot harder. And ultimately, the only way contractually that FedEx is in a position to make this difficult is with your contract negotiation if you don't provide information at all. So I don't look at this as an opportunity to gain leverage on FedEx for better or for worse at an upcoming negotiation or renegotiation or whatever the fact of the case may be. I completely encourage you to just show you exactly the way things are, no better, no worse, and that's it. Because generally, FedEx contractors, we're in a position where it's been a little bit tougher to be a FedEx contractor as of late, and it's probably going to be a recurring theme that they're seeing internally. So I would just, show you exactly how it is.
Yeah, and one thing to emphasize too, right there, do not flat out reject to provide or, refuse to provide any information.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I've seen people just decide that they're going to, put their, plant their flag in the sand and refuse this. That is a very quick way for them to terminate your contract. So it is not a hill worth dying on, especially for the rapid ratings, which is kind of a minimum level of documentation to provide there.
Yeah, and even if they didn't terminate your contract, I think the main thing there is I think they can take away your first right of refusal for negotiating on the next contract. So that's really where the rubber meets the road, and you don't want to lose that ability.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about what the process looks like after the submission. Do you usually, or do you ever see, multiple rounds of questions, or is it usually just you submit and you're done? What can you expect there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple of things I would add there. So number one, during the process, after you've made the submission, it is very common for whatever representative of Rapid Ratings that is assigned to you to reach back out through email and ask some questions, some clarifying questions. And those questions can be just as simple as, I see something on your balance sheet that isn't normally associated with a FedEx contractor, and they might want clarification as to what an account really means. Or another common thing is if you've got some seller financing, you've got some sort of debt on your books, but you haven't paid any interest expense. That's a very common one that I've seen, is where they're going to associate interest expense with any debt shown on the balance sheet. If you're not showing any, they're going to come back and ask, like, where is your interest expense? And it might just be as simple as saying, look, interest is deferred for the first 2 years after the sale. And so, yes, the debt's on the books and properly reflecting that on the balance sheet, but I haven't paid any interest because none's been due. And it can be just that simple. It's not like you're going to have to go like in an audit and say, I've got to send you a signed dated contract proving that deferral is in place. It is just a clarification, a statement from you clarifying whatever it is that they're asking for. And that's usually completely enough. I have never so far, and we've gone through this process at least 10 times. I've never had to actually provide supporting documents beyond a clarifying response to whatever question they're asking, and that question is going to be based on what they're seeing in the financials. So as long as you know what's in your financials, you're going to be able to answer the question usually, and usually their questions are going to be very reasonable. It's not like they're going to ask you why you're paying a certain percentage interest rate on some truck or something. It's going to be just general clarifying questions to get context on the financials that you're providing. Now, once you get through that stage, they're going to essentially issue a report. I don't recall even once getting a notification from the representative and saying that, oh, we're done, be looking for your report. It'll be just all of a sudden, you'll have a notification saying that your report is ready. If you've got 30 days to provide all your information, to respond to the initial request, I would say usually I see it taking another 30 days or so for them to be able to issue the report. It's not a real 3 or 4 month drawn out process, as long as you're responsive. And the report is actually pretty helpful. It does some things that really nobody else is in a position to provide. It allows you to see how you line up against other FedEx contractors just like you, and they put you into different categories. Certainly like an A, B, C, D, and different gradings, if you could think about it from that perspective, as to kind of where you fall on different key metrics that they are looking for. And they call it, essentially a core health assessment. They're trying to see, do you have too much debt? Are you generating enough income? And assess you financially. Obviously, they've already got a ton of operational metrics built into their portal that they're able to access, but this is a financial assessment to give them visibility into how you stack up against FedEx contractors. So you're in a position to be able to get information that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get. And I consider it a good baseline for how somebody else would view you, kind of like a bank. So it's something that I've never given that to a bank for them to try to interpret what it means or help analyze the company in any way. But it can, from a managerial standpoint, help you understand what they're looking at and maybe identify some things that need to improve over the next 12 or 24 months. If they look at it and say that you're in a position of a weaker position in relation to other FedEx contractors because maybe let's just say your debt's too high, then that's something that you can act on and say, you know what, my bank has kind of been a little bit pointing at this as well when I've talked to them. This is just an additional confirmation that maybe I need to focus on this key area and get this back in line. So it's the report itself is helpful, and certainly I take it as just an additional level of information, additional resource to see how we stack up against other contractors. But it's not gonna be a life-changing thing. It's not like you're gonna get some additional merit badge from FedEx if yours is really good, or some additional letter of assurance from FedEx if it's bad. I mean, it just kind of is what it is, and you take it for that and move on.
Perfect. Yeah, it's data, it's a check, it's a fairly minimally invasive process. So don't be afraid of them. But I think the kind of the next important question that comes from that though is, what are kind of some best practices around ongoing document preparation and just financial readiness that you would say contractors should be doing so that when this assessment comes up and they're not scrambling? Like what are some good best practices to just be doing regularly?
Yeah, so just a couple of things here that I would say. Number one, when you said don't be afraid of them, I can wholeheartedly say every representative that has been assigned to us over the last several years has been great to work with. I haven't had one bad experience. So my humble opinion would be, when you start interacting with them, don't treat them like they're an IRS auditor, because I think you'll find that if you treat them well, that you'll have an overall good experience. And I don't have any information to the contrary on that. So as far as best practices, one thing that we recommend around here a lot is making sure that you have structure in place to generate financial analysis, financial records, really on a weekly basis. I mean, when you're thinking about rapid ratings specifically, they're going to be looking at 12-month periods and maybe a year-to-date situation if you find yourself, depending on the timing of the request. But all of that is easier. All of that just can flow very well if you already have a structure in place that allows you to have the information really on a weekly basis. Unfortunately, a lot of FedEx contractors don't put that structure in place around them. They watch cash. They might have a financial statement every month at best, but quarterly at worst. Well, I guess annually at worst, but certainly quarterly would not be as ideal as weekly or monthly. So when you talk about best practices, I am completely in the camp of have somebody else prepare your bookkeeping. Don't be your own bookkeeper, because you are far more valuable as an operator within the business, making sure that the work that is needing to get done gets done. And then you use the financial information to hold people accountable. So when it comes to best practices, if you're doing those things and you get to be an end user of the financial data and checking in on that every single week, so that a little speed bump like forgetting to turn in a rental truck doesn't turn into a slump because all of a sudden your repair expense is blown up for weeks at a time because a manager forgets to turn it in. That's really where I come down on this as far as a best practice, that structure in place to allow you to be the end user of the data allows you to think about, like, a rapid ratings assessment will barely hit your radar really, other than taking in the content of the final report, because you're already getting that information consistently. You know it exists, you know what it says, and you know what's going to influence it to the better or to the worse by the time that you're having to turn it into rapid ratings. And so that, from a best practices standpoint, is what I would recommend. That same approach helps you if FedEx, does a more intrusive audit of the operation, or certainly when your workers' comp side of things, having that structure in place makes those two areas easier as well, which I think we all want to take every opportunity to make something easy. We want to take every one of those opportunities, and this is one of them. And it's a high value proposition. Bookkeeping, paying someone else to do your bookkeeping is not expensive. And so it's one way that you can add time to your own day in a good way. Give yourself more time. So that's what I would say to that question.
Okay. So just as a last one here, it sounds like one mistake you see pretty often is people trying to do it all themselves. Any other common stumbles you see or just problems like just, here's best practices, but here's also things you definitely shouldn't do?
Yeah. So when it comes to, things that you shouldn't do, I would, if there may be some contractors on here, or certainly some that are still doing this, when it comes to manual payroll, I mean, you're not going to have a good experience from a financial reporting standpoint or a FedEx audit standpoint if you're still handling some things manually. Things that I would recommend that are not getting done as often as they probably should have is, having like a third party payroll provider, leverage the expertise of people outside of yourself to do the work that it takes to have a FedEx business. And I really look at that from two categories. It takes resources, meaning bookkeepers and payroll providers and attorneys, or at least access to attorneys, these different third-party providers. It takes those people to have a business, but if you want to put yourself in a position to run the business, you've got to have those people. So I would say the bigger mistakes that I see is when someone is trying to do it all themselves. I talked to a FedEx contractor this week that was looking to do their own, go back because they'd had a bad experience. They were going to go back to doing their payroll manually themselves through QuickBooks Online. And again, the key component there is themselves, and then also doing their own bookkeeping. And I just was, flat out, I said, I would beg you not to do that. Even if you change providers, do not put that back on yourself, because what will happen is it'll become the lowest priority of every single day. And then it won't become a fire. It won't become a priority until it's an absolute fire, because you've got 3 days left to respond to a rapid ratings response questionnaire. And they will, I think they'll do an extension. Thankfully, we haven't had to do one of those, but I think they will do an extension for maybe 10 or 15 days. But just don't put yourself in that position. If you're the one having to do the work, that's the biggest mistake that I see, because you're going to find yourself with 2 or 3 days left to try to put a balance sheet, an income statement, a statement of cash flows together. And that's probably, if you're on here, you might be an accountant, but you're probably still more focused on the FedEx operation. You might can do it, but it's not probably the best use of your time. So that's the biggest mistakes that I've seen, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Your time is more valuable than that, and it should be focused on running the business, even if you have skills there. That is something where you pay someone else who can do that, and they can do it at scale, and they can be responsible for it because it's their job. And you can focus on running the business, dealing with any normal daily fire that comes up when you're operating one of these, and let the experts handle those other pieces of the business that you can offload and pay a third party to help with. Okay, perfect. So before I open it up to Q&A with everyone, I'm going to first, Leland, have you answer another important question. So a reminder for everybody who might have missed the beginning of this webinar, the question of the day this week is a couple of options around New Year's. Either what are your plans this year for New Year's? Do you have any New Year's traditions? Or what is the most memorable New Year's for you? So any of those are acceptable. So Leland, what's your answer?
Yeah, so my family is all over the place. I have a small family, but we get together on New Year's for kind of our Christmas. So that's my tradition. But my bucket list New Year's is to see Avett Brothers play in North Carolina on New Year's Eve. So I will make that happen at some point. It won't be this year, but it will be at some point.
Yeah. Do they play every year on New Year's?
They play every single year in their hometown. And okay. I have every intention of going and seeing them there playing their hometown, but it hadn't happened yet.
That's great. Yeah. I don't really have a tradition. I feel like we end up doing something different every year, but I will say for the past, I don't know how many years we've been going downtown Nashville, and I am done with that. If you've ever been down there for New Year's, everything's expensive, and it takes hours to get back home, and I don't want to do that again. So it's memorable, but not something I would want to repeat. So we're just going somewhere really simple this year, a bar that we always go to that's just staying open and it's free. So just going with some friends, staying there. So I'm looking forward to the minimal level of excitement this year.
Well, good. That sounds great.
Perfect. So I will jump into the Q&A now. So the first one here is from Connor, and so this one's for me. So first, his answer: crab legs and champagne is his tradition. So that's a pretty good tradition.
The crab legs for sure. That's a legit move.
Maybe I'll come join you for New Year's, Connor. So his question's more about, what's your take on unassigned route performance post peak season and in 2023 with the current landscape, solo versus teams. This one's a little bit hard to answer, Connor, just because a lot of it is going to depend on the part of the country you're in, and what your actual terminal looks like. So we can talk about that, and it might be easier for us to spend some time offline talking about this if you have specific questions. But in general, what I would say is, first off, unassigned, these are all line haul terms for somebody, for if you haven't heard them before. An unassigned position is essentially, you're not going to go to the same place every day. There's a rotation and the volume changes week to week. And it's a little bit, you can almost think of it as like the extra runs that no one's running. So the question is basically leaning into, in 2023, is the volume going to be down? Will the unassigned runs still be consistent? As a brief answer, post peak season, if you're talking about directly after peak seasons, like the first couple of weeks of January, there's usually still some good, even some leftover peak volume sometimes around returns. But the first couple months of the year are usually some of the slower times, especially if you're in a more winter territory where some of those roads get difficult to drive on in those months. In terms of how that volume is going to shake out over the rest of the year, we'll see. But I would say that that's going to be one that is going to be a little bit regional and terminal specific. So we can talk about that offline if you have more questions there. So next one is from Ryan. So his question is for you, Leland. Let me see. Oh, his tradition is to play board games with great appetizers. That is also something that I could definitely get down on, Ryan. I will most likely still be playing board games, even if I'm at a bar or at home. So what's the best timekeeping, best way to do timekeeping, the best way that you recommend doing it, to have it in place for an audit, whether it's a technology or a process? What do you recommend there?
Yeah, so I would put my answer into two different buckets. So there's the more manual bucket where you're relying on your manager to track it on a daily basis and be able to account for the hours and the length of time that they've been in for every single day for the week. And then your manager is held accountable and signs off on that for each day and each week. They can augment that or add to that with maybe an iPad that is kept where all of the drivers can log in to be able to keep that. It still can be done manually, but it just gives that additional level of assurance that the drivers are being held accountable for clocking in on a device, so that it makes it easier for the manager, because the manager can't be there at all times for when a driver walks in the door. So that's kind of the more manual method, where it's tracked, it's usually dumped into a spreadsheet or just entered into a spreadsheet and then provided to whoever your payroll provider is. And as long as your manager has signed off on it and you're trusting them to truly be accountable for it, which good financials will hold them accountable for it, because you'll see if they're exceeding what your budget is for your payroll, then that manual process can work fine. The other side of that is using somebody like Paylocity. There's plenty of other providers out there, timekeeping systems that do have payroll integrated or don't have payroll integrated. Regardless, they can have an iPad, they can have some way in the terminal for your drivers to log in their time, essentially scan in, and then it's kept in a third-party provider's timekeeping system, and that is dumped into either a spreadsheet or imported into something like QuickBooks Online or to be able to pay. And there's some benefits to that, because there's, in a system like that, they can log in on their phone. They don't have to necessarily log in on an iPad. And as long as you have geofencing in place to make sure that they are where they're supposed to be when they're actually logging in and starting their time on your clock, then that can protect your company and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and when they're supposed to be doing it. That's going to be a little bit more I won't call it complicated structure. It's just a more robust structure that you'll generally have to pay for rather than that first one. Really, you're not having to pay for any additional resources. So those would be the two buckets that I would say that you would look at considering. Paylocity is again one of them. I know we've looked at others. None of them are coming to mind as far as who I would be willing to recommend, but there's so many. There's so many out there that's. I'm sure you can find one if somebody like Paylocity is not what you're looking for.
Yeah, and an important note when it comes to timekeeping, if you didn't realize or didn't know, you do have to start tracking the hours the second your employee steps foot at the terminal, and it stops the second they leave. So that's not just the terminal, that's on FedEx property. So when they pass the security shack, so those are the the kind of letter of the law, the hours you are tracking. So just make sure that you're not purely tracking hours on the truck. There are additional hours you need to be tracking there. Next question is from Johnny. His New Year tradition is bringing the new year at church. So his question is just generally, what are the steps to becoming a contractor? So I'm not going to go, overly in depth here, Johnny. I will say we actually have a free FedEx 101 course on our site you can go into, and we'll go over it. But in broad terms, essentially what you will do is the most common way is that a FedEx contractor has the ability to sell their territory, their routes in the open market. And so it'll typically either be directly from the seller or through a broker. And you will enter into a contract with that seller, an agreement to purchase the routes. From there, you'll go to FedEx and present. And basically the seller will say, hey, I've entered in an agreement to sell my routes. Will you interview this buyer? And then as a buyer, you'll come in, you'll interview with FedEx. If they approve you, you'll then kind of go through a series of admin steps leading up to closing, where you'll have a contract, sign it, take over the business, and inherit. The drivers and the trucks are typically both inherited. There could be specific contract situations where pieces are not. But that is the most common way. The only other way is that sometimes FedEx will post free routes on the Biz Buy Sell site, and you can, as a random buyer, apply to take over those. And if FedEx accepts your application, you will still inherit those routes. Those are often routes where a struggling contractor has lost them, and they never come with trucks or drivers. So typically that's a much harder road to get started because there's no one to help you. There's no drivers or trucks in place to make the ramp time easier. So I will say that while that is an option, we typically don't recommend it. It's a good option for your second or third acquisition, but it's really hard to make that your first one. And in the chat, we do have the link to the Route Consultant 101 posted if you're looking for that as well. Next one here is from Paul. His tradition is getting together with friends that come in from out of town. That is mine as well. So he said, old friends, old tradition. So he said he's looking at the business for the first time. Is there a fuel surcharge that's paid to help even out fluctuations in fuel prices? Yes. So essentially, you are paid a fuel surcharge. It does not cover all of your fuel costs, but it does hedge against the price of fuel moving up and down. So dynamically each week, as the price of diesel fuel moves up and down, it's indexed against that, and it will adjust up and down to account for those fluctuations in fuel prices. If you need more detail than that, feel free to reach out to us, but there is a fuel surcharge that fluctuates week to week. So next one here is from Andy. So he said, we wing it on New Year's, no traditions. And he said he's just in his first 90 days as a contractor, so he's just relaxing. But his most memorable was Times Square on New Year's Eve. And it was incredible, even though they had to duck into a doorway to keep from getting swept away by the throngs of people. So his question is for you, Leland. Is the information needed for a rapids assessment, is it as simple as just providing an entity P&L and balance sheet along with the corresponding payroll register? Is there anything else, or is that it?
Really, the payroll register for rapid ratings is not even really going to be required. When I was talking about the payroll register, that was related to the FedEx audit. I was trying to kind of differentiate a little bit there between the two types of requests that you might be responding to. So it really is, and again, as I mentioned, it's not intended to be a massively burdensome project for the FedEx contractor. You're providing a balance sheet, income statement. The third piece there is the statement of cash flows, which is something that's less commonly used, but it's something that your bookkeeper generally is going to be able to provide just as a standard financial statement. So balance sheet, income statement, statement of cash flows, and then responding to whatever requests or questions that they have associated after their review of that. So that's how I would answer that, to try to keep it simple. And again, just to reinforce, very often when FedEx contractors are feeling pressure over a rapid ratings response, it's because they don't have the structure in place. They find themselves with 3 days left heck, I'm an accountant, and if I had 3 days left to respond to rapid ratings and I knew I had to go in and build weeks or months of financial statements to be able to respond appropriately to them, that would be a pretty pressure spot to be in. So again, it all comes down to having structure in place, and it really can be fairly unintrusive.
Yep, perfect. Next one here is from Susan. So her tradition is playing board games with the family. Again, support that. Who do you recommend we speak to regarding daily route versus hourly pay for our employees? If you reach out to the team, reach out to info@routeconsultant.com and kind of submit exactly what you're talking about there. I can probably help talk through and help you review there. But just at a high level, hourly pay outside of certain states is typically not what we would recommend. Daily, usually a daily wage, if you are in a truck over 10,000 pounds, is what we would recommend. It incentivizes getting done as quickly as possible, which is more of what you're going for, versus hourly, which can also often incentivize taking as long as they can to extend the amount they're paid. So feel free to reach out though, because there's much more nuance to it than that, and it really just depends on your situation. And happy to review it with you. Next one here is from Mike. His New Year's tradition is to watch college football, all the bowl games. I am also a fan. So we mentioned that rapid ratings requests information every 18 months or so. How often will FedEx audit a contractor? Do you know that, Leland?
How often will they audit the contractor? So if there is a set period, I don't know what it is. So we've had some contracts that have never been audited, or maybe back before me type situations, and then some that have been reviewed annually. So it really, I don't know what to point at to be able to predict when you would expect it. If you're having to ask, I think hopefully it means you haven't been asked yet, and you're just kind of waiting for that other to shoot a drop, and maybe it won't, and that would be awesome. We've certainly seen that on some of our contracts, and hopefully you'll be in that bucket. But yeah, I wish I could answer it more directly, but I just can't.
Yeah, and it varies wildly across the board. There could be something on the back end on the FedEx side that triggers an audit, but it's just not something we have enough data to be able to say definitively whether it is or isn't. So like Leland said, it could be some type of process or some type of review, and maybe it's done terminally, maybe it's done regionally, but there's just not a firm answer there to give you, unfortunately.
No.
So next question is from Ryan, who asked a question earlier. Do you see FedEx expanding, not operating on Sundays? Hopefully, it'd be great. There's a lot of advantages to not operating on Sunday, but we don't have any update or any kind of leading knowledge there yet. We'll see kind of how the year develops, and ideally it is something where more contractors don't have to operate on Sundays. For those of you who haven't heard that or don't know why that's the case, Sundays are typically lower volume, and so especially in rural territories is where it's tough, where you may have a territory that you have to drive hundreds of miles a day to cover the entire area. And so maybe volume is lower on Sunday, but you still have to hit a lot of those stops that are really far away. So you can't run very efficiently. You have to send fewer routes out. And a lot of days, Sundays are just a money loser. And so the other huge thing is if Sundays were not in operation, then you only have to staff 6 days a week, which is far easier from a staffing perspective. So we'll see. Ideally, yes, but again, don't have anything concrete right now to say to that point. Next one from Faraz. So his tradition or what he's doing this year is preparing for in-laws family gathering. I don't know if that's a pro or a con.
Or a bad thing.
In-laws. Yeah.
He really left us on the dark on that one.
So his first question is, is a cash purchase faster than a financing purchase? It's yes and no. So the thing from a process standpoint, cash will probably get a seller to accept the offer more quickly. But it's not going to change the FedEx process. So even if the cash purchase has gotten you to the table faster with the seller and they accept it, you still have to go through the same steps with FedEx, and they don't care how you purchased it. I will say that sometimes financing can introduce timeline hurdles on the back end if they need additional documentation, because maybe FedEx has caused the process to take longer, and it's gone long enough where now banks have to ask for more documentation to be up to date. So that could slow things down. But outside of that, once you've gotten past the deal, cash and financing are typically similar timelines, because we're just waiting on kind of checking all the FedEx boxes to get to a closing. But the second part of that question is which is faster, SBA or conventional from a financing path? I would say conventional will almost always be faster. It's a smaller set of people to be working with. You usually got a better relationship. SBA has just a higher bar of documentation and proof that you have to go through to get qualified for one of those loans. So conventional is 9 times out of 10 going to be faster than the SBA.
Yep.
All right. This one, maybe you have an answer for this, Leland. So it's from Ryan. Do you recommend paying off an SBA loan with your 401k if you're retired?
Man, there's some variables there. Here's the factors that I would consider. I think I can offer that. Yep. So number one is, my question would be, is your SBA loan fixed or is it variable? So if it's variable and you're seeing interest rate pressure going up right now, and you're seeing it all of a sudden maybe be pushing 10% right now, I don't know. I mean, I could expect that an SBA variable rate loan could be 10% right now. In that case, in a market where I'm an accountant, keep in mind, I'm somewhat risk averse, I could see kind of paying some of that down to take some chips off the table. And if I'm not going to be in the market in the volatility that we're seeing right now, I could see an argument being made to go ahead and pay down some of that debt, de-risk some, not be as beholden to the higher interest rates. And if it's not already going to be at risk in the market where I could be beating a 10% interest rate or a 10% return in the market, I think there's an argument to be made there. If I have a fixed rate, and let's just say I'm paying 6.5 or 7% with the SBA right now, I wouldn't dare pay that down unless, well, I don't know what would make me pay it down, because right now with inflation where it is, you're paying that debt off with cheaper dollars down the road, which makes that 6 or 7% interest rate something lower in effective real world dollars when it comes time to actually pay it. And so even if you didn't have your money in the market making any money for you, you're still winning in that scenario by not paying off your debt. So again, those are some examples of some of the variables that I would consider and try to figure out which bucket I fit into to make a decision there.
Yeah, and what I'd advise from that is, if you have an accountant, you should be going over, that's a question to take to your accountant and kind of look at your specific books and your specific everything and kind of get a more firm answer there. Okay, so last question here is from Gary. His most memorable is Disney World 2000 and the Pasadena Rose Parade in 2015. I will say I have been to Disney World on New Year's Eve, and it is also memorable for me because that was a nightmare. They closed the park because it was full, and you never want to be in Disney World where the park is actually full at capacity. I remember one ride had like a 280-minute wait time, and I was just like, why am I even here? So his question is, are the audits and the rapid ratings, are they the same for P&D and line haul? Is it the same type of process?
Well, real quick, if he's saying that it was Disney World, I guess Disney World 2000, does that mean like January 1st, 2000. I mean, the world was supposed to be ending that night. So that's a
true.
heck of
Wow,
a place.
that's even that
I
could be
remember
very
that. And everybody pretty much thought we were all saying goodbye.
Yeah, Y2K. Wow, that would have been fun at Disney World.
I would have to ask for a little more information to get the full scope there. But
Yeah.
so clarify his question there. I'm sorry.
So are the audits and the rapid assessments, are they the same for P&D and line haul?
So when it comes to rapid ratings, the same reporting is required: the balance sheet, income statement, statement of cash flows, and then responding to whatever questions. The answer is yes to that, but just the nature of the audit, if you're really going through a FedEx audit, the very nature of the audit is making sure you're in compliance with the contract, and the contracts are so different that they're not going to be the same experience.
Yeah, the actual FedEx audit, if you're going through it, will be different. P&D and line haul in the same way that the contracts are. That's exactly right. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Leland, for coming out today. That's all the questions we have, all the time we have today. So for everybody who joined, this was the last webinar of 2022. So thank you for being here, and we will see you all next year.